Hi. Yes, I know there is a green screen behind me, and yes, I know it wiggles with my chair, and yes, I know it doesn't cover up everything behind me. I've only got it there because there's so much sunlight coming in through these crappy blinds that my landlord refuses to replace, even though that the one directly behind the screen is broken. Um, so it's bringing it's bleh. So much light is coming this way that it's messing with the camera. So I've got it there just so that my camera doesn't get confused. Um, right. So my topic this time around is something that I have thought about for years now, and I just want to preface this by stating that I have had friends who are trans. I have had friends who are gay, and when I say gay, I mean male or female. I know that nowadays people mean gay, or if they say gay, they mean men, and it's always been lesbian for women. Some people will use the term homosexual, and to me, homosexual is males and females, everybody, really. So if I'm not using the term that you're comfortable with or that you think is the right one, I'm sorry. I'm an old guy. Cut me some slack. Um, so, first of all, there are a wide range of reasons that people choose what they choose. The reasons range from it was normal where they grew up to they were molested or otherwise sexually abused. I mean, I don't really know how it could be other than molested, but or maybe they have body dysmorphia or gender dysmorphia or whatever the other term. They may have been born with genetic variants. And now I know we were taught in school it's X and Y chromosomes, and that determines your gender, but it is never that simple with genetics. There isn't just two things determining what your body looks like, how it gets put together. It's a variety of different things. I work with people who are in the LGBTQ plus community, and I support that. There are family members who are in that community. Um, so when I look at the hate that is directed, like a few months ago, I saw a child doing an advertisement that was anti LGBTQ and stuff like that. I was mortified that a parent could be so insensitive to what they were putting their child through that they made them do that advertisement. 12, I think the kid was 12 or something like that, and didn't appear like he was in puberty yet. And he was talking, I didn't watch for very long because I was just so upset. But it was a religiously motivated speech given by a child who isn't, and no disrespect to children, but to fully comprehend religion and comprehend the complexities of the human body at that age, the vast majority of adults don't understand, let alone children. So it was really, to me, I feel that the parents should have been brought up on criminal charges for putting their child in that position, because that child is going to be the one who faces the brunt of bullying for what he said. And it's not his fault that he's ignorant. It's not his fault if the school didn't teach him about androgyny and other genetic variances. It's not his fault that his parents indoctrinated him, brainwashed him. And it's not his fault that he doesn't understand human behavioral biology. He doesn't understand psychology. He doesn't understand genetics and epigenetics. He doesn't understand anything that is related to the very broad topic of gender and sexual preferences. He has no clue. And he certainly wasn't educated by his parents or his religious leader on it, because I doubt they know either. I have spent some time researching it and learning about it because I didn't really grow up as a child seeing people who were homosexual. I heard about it. I knew it existed. My parents at that time were religious enough that I was told that it's a sin and stuff like that. But aside from that, I mean, I didn't have a great deal of awareness about what it meant to be bi or being a homosexual man or being queer is something that was never even on my radar until much later, let alone middle sex, which I only learned about in my 40s. And the fact that doctors would play God and they would alter the physical genitalia of a baby, sometimes at the request of the parents, sometimes without the parents' knowledge, to make it look clearly male or female. So over the years, I've gained a much better understanding. I wouldn't say that I fully understand. There are things about some people in those communities that irritate me, like when some gay men choose to talk with a very whiny voice. And it has nothing to do with the fact that they're homosexuals or bi or whatever. I just find a whiny voice to be irritating. I taught my children, I don't want to hear you whine. I taught my students when I was a teacher, don't whine. I just don't like it. It has nothing to do with gender or sexual preference. I just don't like it. So when I was living in Indonesia, I found out about middle sex, and I was like, wow, I had no clue. I mean, I had heard the term hermaphrodite. I had never seen photographs that I can recall. And I know that in this day and age, middle sex or intersex is the term for those people that should be used. But back then, there was no such term, back when I was young. And the first person I met who was trans was when I was, I'm going to say, in my late 20s. I knew people who were not open about their sexual preferences or that they wanted to be or were trans. The same goes for religion, too. I mean, there were people that never really talked about religion, and I didn't know what they were. I didn't ask them because it wasn't important to me. And eventually I found out, and I was like, huh, I didn't know that. I was surprised. Not in a bad way. I was just surprised. So when people came out as being lesbians or bi or gay men or trans, or then it was like, oh, okay, that's fine. So my house was overall a fairly tolerant house. My parents, aside from the religious guilt tripping about sexual preference, they taught me about equal rights for women, for minorities. They taught me a lot of good things. So I did not grow up with this big chip on my shoulder like these idiots in the KKK or these other hate groups. And if you are a Christian and you are propagating hate, well, you clearly don't understand what Jesus taught. Um, so middle sex, to clarify, is where you are born and you may have both male and female genitalia, or you may have one type, but when you hit puberty, you develop physical indications of the other gender, the other gender. And, I think I want to introduce the term dichotomy. A dichotomy is where there's two positions. It's very black and white. There's no gray. And in my 57 years of life, I've learned that everything virtually is black and white and gray. There's nothing that's truly a dichotomy. There are false dichotomies, but it's very, very rare to find a true dichotomy where it's two polar opposites and nothing in between. So when people say there's only male and female, they are ignoring a wide and deep pool of evidence that disproves that claim. There have been girls who grew up to find out that they were actually supposed to have been men, but the doctor cut it off, thinking it was that he was dealing with a girl. There have been lots of cases. Additionally, if you study human behavioral biology, eventually you'll come across some research that was done looking at trying to find out if there are any physical connections between the preference for being homosexual or heterosexual. And some of the research discovered that, yes, there are indicators that correlate, and we can't say this is a causation. We don't know that. But what we can say is there are indicators. For example, in the brain, they discovered that if you took the brains of a bunch of women and the brains of a bunch of men, and then you took the brains of a bunch of people who were homosexual, what they discovered was that there were certain structures in the brain that are different between males and females, and in the case of the homosexuals, the women who were lesbians had brain structures that were more similar to a heterosexual man, and there were homosexual men who had certain brain structures that were more similar to those of a heterosexual woman. And these areas are potentially linked to sexual preference. But again, there are other things that affect sexual preference. But when it comes to but it also can affect gender, or it can be related to gender too, or gender belief. So prior to learning about this, and I audited an entire class at Stanford online to try to understand a lot of things, and I learned new things. Some of it I already knew, but I learned definitely new things, including that. And up until that point, my assumption was that anybody who was queer was mentally ill. Well, when I learned about these structural differences in the brain, I realized at least some, if not all, queers are like that because of physical differences, and it can also be chemical differences. So there are different reasons why people have dysmorphia, where they are constantly miserable with the way they look, and they will actually, in extreme cases, they will actually disfigure themselves in an attempt to look the way they think they should look, or they will starve themselves, or what. I've seen some very disturbing videos about this descent into hell that they go through. But you have to understand that mental illness has there are different roots, different things that can happen that can cause mental illness. It can be trauma, like an accident. It can be abuse. It can be sexual abuse. It can be growing up in a culture where something that is bad for mental health is normal. Like in a cult. There are some cults where the leader of the cult will mutilate disobedient members and even kill disobedient members, and force members to participate in the mutilation and murder and cover-up. So these all can have very lasting impacts on both the way you process things, the way you look at the world, and additionally can sometimes also have an impact on how your body works and when it comes to producing various hormones and things like that. And as a consequence, you can have long-term consequences whereby, say, for example, you have depression and you come out of depression because you've already had depression. If something bad enough happens, you are much more likely to become depressed again than somebody who has never had depression. And for those of you, including one of my university professors who said, I don't believe in depression, it's real. I have struggled off and on my whole life. Well, not my whole life, but since I was a teenager with depression. And it sucks. It really and truly sucks. But that's not the point of my video. And it's not the point of what I'm talking about right now. The point is that exposure to things that make you have certain kinds of mental illnesses, you can re-trigger those mental illnesses, especially if it happens shortly after you recover. The longer you go, if it's just sheerly a mental illness with no chemical or physical components to it, the longer you go without relapsing into that mental illness, the less likely you are to relapse. Why is that? Well, because your brain rewires itself. Your body changes the way, and how much it produces of things. So over time, your body learns, oh, this is the new normal, so let's do it this way. And it becomes more and more comfortable. It becomes habitual. And you get to a point where you're no longer thinking, this is what I've got to do, which is part of what I did in order to overcome the 4 phobias that I had. And then your brain rewires itself. I mean, literally, the connections in your brain, in certain parts of your brain at least, are changed. And so eventually it becomes automatic. And once it gets to the point of being automatic, it's really hard for you to relapse back into that mental illness. It's not that it can't happen, but it's really hard. You can also push yourself into mental illness. High stress, for example, can make you mentally ill. Consuming substances that are addictive can make you mentally ill. Consuming medicines that are not a good match for you personally, because honestly, drugs are not tailored. They are mass marketed, and unless you're going to what in Britain they would say bespoke, in the U.S. it's compound pharmacies. They make custom blends. Now, most doctors do not prescribe custom blends. Most doctors, as far as I know, are not trained on that. So that I can only recall having met one doctor in Indonesia who actually ordered a compound or custom medicine for me because of seborrheic dermatitis that other doctors had not even recognized as being seborrheic dermatitis, including dermatologists. But again, I don't want to get too off track here. The point that I'm trying to make here is that medicine should be tailored to you personally. Because, for example, my wife, when she was alive, she was resistant to anesthetics. They had to give her, I believe she said, a triple dose for each of her 2 C-sections in order for her to be numbed. And my children have inherited a resistance to anesthetics, not as strong as my wife's. Also, my wife did not respond the way that most people respond to caffeine, in that when she consumed caffeine, it would make her sleepy. And that also happens to my daughter and sometimes to my son. Now, me, I limit my caffeine intake. I do not consume caffeine beverages on a daily basis. I only consume them on days when I wake up and I'm really sluggish and got brain fog and stuff like that, so that I can function safely. But the rest of the time I don't consume it, because I know it's addictive, because I know it alters the way your brain works, and the more often you consume it and the larger the quantity gets, it's just like other drugs. You have to keep on ramping it up, and eventually you become dependent on it to function, and you get to a certain point where even though you're consuming it, it's not helping it like it used to. And how long it helps you rapidly decreases. So as the usage increases, the efficacy decreases. So that's the whole point. Now, getting back to the subject of LGBTQ plus, some of these people have made a conscious decision that I don't want to be identified as male and female. I have some wonderful friends that I work with who are in that category, and they're a couple. And one is clearly visibly female, the other is clearly visibly male, but they identify as non-binary. And from talking to them, and I'm not trying to represent them, but my impression is that they have chosen this as a way to speak out against the stereotypical norms of male and female. They don't want to contribute to that problem, and they do not want to have to fit those stereotypical molds. Now, I can definitely relate to that, because I have spent my life not trying to fit the mold of being a male. I have had people come up to me and say, "Are you gay?" No, I'm not gay. Because I'm not masculine enough in my behavior. I'm more sensitive than people, and I don't walk around that stereotypical caveman mentality. If you watch The Hurt Locker, where the 2 sergeants are beating the crap out of each other, that kind of thing, that doesn't fly with me. I don't like it, and I don't think it's good for health. I think that people need to be free to express themselves across a range. And when you suppress that desire for somebody to not fit into a stereotype, you push them further away from the stereotype you want them to follow, because it makes them miserable, it makes them angry, and some of them will become rebellious. So in public or secretly, they are going to get less and less like what you want them to do. You're forcing them into a more extreme direction than they would have taken if you just left them alone. You are part of the reason they behave the way they do. Those of you who are persecuting and condemning and judging, you're not God. Stop it. You don't have that right. I don't care if you're the Pope. I don't care if you're the Dalai Lama. I don't care if you are the leader, one of the leaders of the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. They rebranded. They don't like to be called Mormons, but it's a cult, so whatever. I don't care if you're one of the leaders of the brainwashing society called Scientology. I don't care. When you tell people they can't be the way they are, and they're not hurting people, then you're just creating misery for them, and you may lose them in your life because they will walk away to be true to themselves rather than be forced to conform to your narrow-minded viewpoint. So, if you want to be bi, which I am, or you want to be homosexual, or you want to be trans, or you want, or for whatever reason, biochemical, physical combination, you want to be queer, or you decide that, well, I just want to be non-binary. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. If you want to have a gender reassignment, I strongly urge you, number one, to work. Well, that was inconvenient. Now you can see why I had that back there, because the light from the sun is too bright. Right. So, yeah. If you want to make that change, please talk to people who have already made the change. Now, I don't just mean people who have recently done it, but that's important too, because you can find out based on current medical procedures what you're going to probably experience. You also should be talking to somebody who is an expert in psychology or psychiatry, not to have them convince you not to do that, because if they're doing that, then they're not doing their job. Their job is not to tell you what to do. Their job is to help you decide and to help prepare yourself. So you need to find a professional who can help you make a decision and can without trying to guide you in one direction or the other, and can help you to mentally prepare yourself. Because maybe you are choosing subconsciously because of abuse you endured when you were younger. And when you transition, you'll discover, this isn't helping me. And then you can't transition back, because it's not like a vasectomy or a tubal ligation. It's far more complicated, and the risks of transitioning back are way higher than the risk of just transitioning. And I mean both in terms of failure and in terms of permanent or even fatal results that are not good. Yeah. You should also talk to people who have transitioned and have been that way for years to find out how they're doing. And don't just talk to one or two people. Find a community and talk to all of them. And make sure they're being honest with you, because some of them may feel pressure, especially if they're like a high-profile figure for that community. They may not be a good choice because they may be dishonest with you, because they feel they have to protect the community of people who are trans. So be careful. Finally, I recently became aware of the issue with Riley Gaines and Leah Thomas and Scanlon and that swimming team, where Leah decided to transition from, I think her name used to be Will, and eventually was allowed onto the women's team and into the women's locker, and was not fully transitioned, if I understand correctly, because in one of the interviews I saw, Riley said that Leah still had a bulge. And the swimming team was not given an option to say, no, we do not feel comfortable with somebody who has not fully transitioned being in the locker room seeing us naked. And in Riley's case, I believe she was already married at that time. And the only person that she wanted to have herself revealed to, as far as a male is concerned, was her husband, and is her husband. And I'm sure that some of the others felt the same way. But they were, apparently, there were some threats against them if they said anything, if they did anything to fight that. I don't personally know. This is what some of the comments that Riley has made in front of, I believe, Congress and other groups of people and in interviews. Now, one of the worst interviews that Riley was involved in was with this jackass named Piers Morgan, who's a British guy, and apparently he's got a really humongous ego and is very, very opinionated, because I saw virtually nothing that was productive or useful about that interview, where he had invited on, let's see, there were 4 guests that he invited on. Riley was one of them. Another one was Brandon Tatum. There was a British gay man. There was a black woman who I think was also British, but their names, let me see if I can get their names here. James Barr was one of them. I think that was the gay man. Oh, whoops. Piers Morgan Uncensored. Yeah. So let's see if I can. Esther Krakue. There we go. So Esther Krakue, James Barr, Brandon Tatum from the Officer Tatum YouTube channel, and Riley Gaines. And they did talk about the situation with Leah Thomas. They also talked about Dylan Mulvaney. And then, in an ultimately ridiculous turn of events, Piers Morgan decided to try to cancel the new choice for James Bond because he's not off screen a man's man. So, I was personally, I find Piers Morgan's behavior on that video, and I don't know what he's like off screen, but he was being very, very shallow and judgmental on screen about Dylan Mulvaney, who I don't really know enough to talk about, and about this new Bond candidate. And additionally, he was being really a jerk. I mean, apparently Piers would hate somebody like me because I eat kale, because the next James Bond is a kale muncher with curly hair. I really don't see how that is relevant. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger had to become at least a vegetarian, if not a vegan, because in order to save his life from heart disease after decades of consuming all that meat and stuff in order to be a bodybuilder, and he turned his heart disease around. So, Piers Morgan seems to like to talk about stuff over which he has very shallow opinions and over which he is not well informed. He also condemned Oprah about her weight loss fraud where she was using Ozempic, which I didn't even know about. And he was like, well, she clearly was lying. She clearly didn't care until she got caught. Okay, I am of the opinion that lots of actors and actresses, they're using the art of lying to convince the audience that there's a good performance. That doesn't mean that off screen they're all liars. Are some of them? Yes. Are some of them manipulative and use their skills as an actor or actress to manipulate and control people? Yes, absolutely. Just like politicians do all the freaking time. Does that mean, however, that Oprah was insincere when she apologized for using Ozempic, when she apologized for misleading all the people who got on Weight Watchers because she was their spokesperson? No, it doesn't mean she was insincere. This episode with Piers, and I've never watched him before, and I have no intention of watching him again if I can possibly avoid it, was extremely he deliberately allowed it to repeatedly descend into chaos. And James Barr was exceedingly outspoken, talking over other people routinely. And he was taking offense at everything. Apparently he was chosen to represent all the people who are in the LGBTQ community because He certainly seemed to pick up the flag of pronouns. He picked up the flag of trans. He picked up every single flag that had to do with that group of people. And I don't really think that he's anything other than a gay man. So it to me, it just seemed like you're kind of, are you officially there as a spokesperson or not? There was not a scientific person who could talk on the subject of being trans, or talk about the medical differences between an adult male or female like Bruce Jenner transitioning into Caitlyn Jenner. There was nobody there with any kind of credentials that I'm aware of who were qualified to weigh in. So this was basically just like some mud fight with people, yelling at each other, and making uninformed comments for the most part. I thought that the most restrained person was probably Riley and also Brandon. And but there was a lot of comments from them all that just showed a lack of understanding. And Riley missed some opportunities to clarify certain things. For example, in one of the interviews I saw with Riley, she stated that when she and Leah competed, at the end, the head judge came to them and he said, "You two tied." And so there's no winner. However, I'm giving the trophy to Leah. Now, keep in mind, this was not an intergender competition. This was an adult male who was in the process of transitioning to female versus a lot of women. And if you look at top athletes, it is very, very rare for a woman to be able to perform at the same level as a man. And Riley did not take the opportunity in Piers Morgan's episode to point out that she was not defeated by Leah. They tied. So I think that's something that needs to be brought forward. That just because you have transitioned doesn't mean that you're going to beat the people of the gender you're transitioning to. That said, I don't think that a non-fully transitioned person should be allowed to compete with people of the same gender that they're transitioning to, especially if they're transitioning during the end of or after puberty. Because in general, and there are going to be exceptions, but in general, the physique of a male is more suited to certain things than the physique of a female. Now, I'm not talking about pregnancy when I say that women also have certain superiorities in certain ways. But if we're talking purely about sports, then women, and I'm not talking about the average woman, but I'm talking about women who are professional athletes like Riley and Miss Scanlon. There are differences, and if you put a transitioning male or transitioned male in with them, especially if the person is fully transitioned after an adult, the chances are that that person will rise to the top above all the genuinely female competitors. Whether they feel female or not on the inside, like Bruce Jenner felt like he was female even though he was male for most of his life until, I guess, the age of 65 when he became Caitlyn. Or not is not particularly relevant. It's what is your body's physique like? Now, one thing that I think it was James Barr said during this episode was that the athletes should compete based on their body size and or body something about the body. And Immediately, Piers was up in arms about that, and somebody else was too. And I was like, wait a second. What is the problem with that? That's what they do in boxing, for example. You don't have a 5'10", 90-pound man going up against Mike Tyson. It doesn't happen because it's not a fair fight for most people. Most people who are 5'10" and 90 cannot compete against Mike Tyson. Now, there are some specialists out there who, if the rules were different, would be able to beat him down. But most people, especially smaller people, they get hit by Mike Tyson, they're down, and they don't get back up. So my personal feelings, and I'm deliberately using the word feelings, on the topic of trans people participating against people who have not transitioned but are of their target gender is it should not be allowed. Now, then we come into this problem, however, of the number of people who have transitioned to the opposite gender is very small. And of those people, the number who are professional athletes is extremely small. I want to add a caveat. If somebody transitions at the start of puberty or before puberty, I don't have a problem with them competing as long as they go through the whole process as their new gender. And they're not doing things the wrong way, because then they will physiologically be very, very much like other people of that gender. I know this is probably a controversial opinion, but, Caitlyn Jenner, who all of her life had gender dysmorphia or gender dysphoria. I forget what term it was that Caitlyn used. And then finally, at the age of 65, decided, well, I've got my family to a point where they're stable, so I'm going to transition. And 9 years ago, I guess it was, transitioned. Caitlyn herself is coming out against Leah Thomas and other athletes like Leah Thomas from a position of understanding better than me and most people who are out there why it's not fair to have to compete with a person who transitioned as an adult to the opposite gender. So I think that this is very important. I personally think that if somebody wants to have a particular pronoun be used, they need to put a name tag on or tattoo it on a visible part of their body so that everybody knows, oh, this person wants to be referred to as Sie, for example, which is, I think, German for somebody who's not considered male or female. And if you're not going to do that, then you should not expect people to call you by the the pronoun that you prefer. I mean, me, I'm at the point in my life where I'm forgetting people's names, much less their pronouns. It's not easy. And I didn't grow up with this pronoun issue. I didn't have to deal with this pronoun issue until I came back to the U.S. from Indonesia in 2017 after my wife died, at which point I was a mess mentally. I had PTSD, I had depression, I had anxiety, I was poor, I had 2 kids I was trying to protect and raise, and they were messed up from the loss of their mother and the 2.5 years of hell we went through as we watched my wife die of cancer, and finally hypoglycemia is what killed her, at which point she had stage 4 cancer anyways. So, yeah. All you people who think that you know better just because of your religion, you don't know squat. You're just an intolerant bigot. I don't care what religion you are. That's your choice. But when you force your religious beliefs on me or anybody else who doesn't agree with them, and you influence the government to take sides when we live in a secular nation where state and religion are supposed to be separate, that is wrong. If you don't like it, do not turn this into a religious nation. Move to another nation. All you fundamentalists out there need to understand that you grew up with the privilege of being born into or raised in the world's most overbearing, bullying nation that takes advantage of a large number of other nations to get things to keep this nation strong. But that does not give you the right to turn this into a Christian state or a Muslim state or a Jewish state or anything else other than what it is now, which is secular. And what has been done to the Supreme Court is a horrible breach of the Constitution, on top of what has been done to the position of the presidency, where the president has felt more and more free generation after generation to abuse the executive order power. And Congress is not off the hook either. We are running, we are not walking, we're not crawling, we're running so far away from the Constitution, from the protections that we need to make this a fair, just, and equitable nation, that maybe the corruption isn't visible to a lot of you, but in 57 years, heck, I even in my 20s, I was already aware of the breadth of the corruption of this nation. We may not rank in the top 10, the top 20, the top 50 of most corrupt nations, but we should. I feel bad for anybody who's a soldier, because you're not helping protect our nation. You're helping the elites get richer and spilling your blood in the process. You are a puppet, and I feel bad for you, especially those of you who believe it when they say, oh, do it for America, be a patriot. But that's not the topic of my video. So, please learn about human behavioral biology, learn about psychology, learn about genetics and epigenetics, and about all of these different types of gender variances that somebody can be born with. It's not just male and female. And learn that and understand that when you push somebody to conform to what you believe they should be, they will, publicly or privately, rebel. And the worst amongst them are going to do worse than rebel, because you will be turning them into mentally unstable people, and some of them will become violent. Some of them will publicly denounce what they are while privately reveling in it, and some of them will murder people. For example, Scott Harrison, Don Hall, Josh Canfield, Eugene H. Peterson, Ted Haggard, Israel Folau, Luis Botelho, and many more were either, most of those people that I named were covertly either covertly homosexual, or they were trying not to be homosexual, and some of them were denouncing homosexuality, and they have come out. And there are some who have gone back in. In the case of Bob Botelho, he is openly gay and still a pastor and activist in Brazil. So the point is that when you pressure these people to conform to your beliefs, to conform to your expectations, bad things can happen. And it won't just be their fault. You will also be at fault because you will have helped to turn them into the monster that some of them become. And you will have to live with that. So if one of them goes off and becomes a serial murderer, and it doesn't have to be just the LGBTQ community. If you were one of those bullies who bullied somebody relentlessly in school and they became a school shooter, you're a shooter. If you bullied somebody who became a serial killer, you are a serial killer. If you bullied somebody who later became a sociopath and was murdering people, you're a sociopath. And I say that by proxy. You're not actually a sociopath or a serial killer or whatever. By proxy, you are. You helped to create those monsters. You helped to make our society and this planet worse. So those people you see who hoard money, some of them did it because they were exceedingly poor, and others did it because of things that happened in their lives that propelled them to want to have ultimate control and power to the point that they don't even know when is enough. I mean, Elon Gates and Zuckerberg and Bezos, Jassy, and so many others. They're never satisfied. Buffett is not satisfied. And some of these people are extremely destructive. And they don't care. Because they are propelled by a form of mental illness, be it megalomania or monomania or being a hoarder of wealth or whatever it is. They're propelled by mental illness to often without regard for consequence, to accrue as much wealth and power as they can or do other things. It's just when you have wealth and power, it's a lot easier to get away with it because you'll be protected. How many stories are there of con artists in the financial sector who were protected by the SEC because they didn't want to admit or they didn't want to believe that this person could possibly be involved in criminal activity? So again, please back off. Leave them alone. Let them make their own decisions. As long as they're not hurting people, it's none of your business. And when I say hurting people, I mean hurting people. I'm not talking about you feel uncomfortable. However, if they are doing things that create potentially dangerous situations, that's something that needs to be dealt with. There needs to be a line drawn, and it needs to be a reasonable line that takes into consideration everybody, and that's a hard thing to do, especially because we live in a country, in a world where most governments are corrupt, if not all, and they do not take into consideration most groups of people. And most people are so focused on getting rich that they don't care who they crush or who they murder or whose lives they destroy. I mean, look at what happened to Oppenheimer. You know, according to the movie, Strauss tried to and succeeded in destroying his reputation. And then his reputation, in turn, was destroyed when he was preparing to become a cabinet member because it was exposed that he had done that. Now, I don't know if that is factual or just pure fiction because Hollywood puts lots of fiction and stuff that's based on a true story. But nevertheless, don't take your religious beliefs and force them onto other people. Now, I realize you Christians, you think that's your job. It's not. It's rude, especially if somebody has told you, don't do that. I came very close last month to reporting one of my coworkers for proselytization because she pretended, as they often do when they're proselytizing, to be interested in my viewpoint on religion because she knew that I wasn't a Christian, and she had at one point thought I was an atheist because she said, "You're just too smart." How she figured out that I was too smart, I don't know. How she made that determination, I thought it was. She's not very well educated, so maybe her decision that because he's smart, he doesn't believe in God. When I do, as a deist, believe in God. But she then proceeded to use the typical tactics. And then, when I answered a question honestly about my wife, she said I was lying. So she had repeatedly proselytized me when she knew I wasn't interested, and then she called me a liar. I almost went to HR and almost filed a complaint against her. And I have family members who still disrespect my religious beliefs and still try to convert me on a regular basis. I find it extremely disrespectful. And I do not appreciate it one iota. I don't care what you think is going to happen to me when I die. I don't agree with you. I don't think that's going to happen. And you do not have a right to continue to come after me with your religious convictions, because I don't believe them. I don't believe in religion, period. And I don't believe that religious people have their right in this country, in America, to impose their beliefs on anybody else, be it about religion or politics or LGBTQ. That is not your right. Back the F off. If you don't like it, get out of this country, go somewhere where you can be a Christian and proselytize and demonize and do whatever you want, but don't do it in America. This is supposed to be the land of the free, not the land of one group oppressing other groups. We've got enough countries in the world that do that all the time. We don't need you. We don't need any of you if that's what you're going to do. We need a better place. We need heaven on earth. We don't need you to continue to propagate hell on earth with your inconsiderate and immature and ill-informed behavior. Leave them alone. If they're gay or they're bi or they're trans or whatever, you don't understand. It's not some crime they've committed against God. It's your myopic viewpoint that's the problem. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.